For those of you that are tuning in on Zoom, I'm Donnie Miller, and this is the York County Writers Roundtable, and we network writers and researchers of York County, and we talk about York County history and regional history. The group usually meets on the first Thursday of every quarter at 7 p.m. We're going to kick it off with Nicole from the York History Center. She's going to talk about some upcoming programming, and then we will get to our presentation. Nicole?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Great to see you all this evening. Just a couple announcements before we get started with the program. This webinar is being recorded and will be on the York County History Center's YouTube channel. The History Center museums and library are currently closed to prepare for our move. The new History Center at the steam plant will be open to the public starting in July. We'll have open house events for members of the History Center in late June, so please take a look for that. We will continue to hold programs like this one right here in the meeting hall until the new building is open. For more updates and more information on our programs, please visit yorkhistorycenter.org. Couple things coming up. Our second Saturday, March 9th, speaker is April Thomas. She's speaking on tavern dining in Britain and America. On Wednesday, March 20th, our Civil War Roundtable speaker is Scott Mingus, speaking on the role of railroads at Gettysburg. On Saturday, March 23rd, we'll be having a genealogy seminar here. It's called Bunny Slipper Genealogy, and it's about resources online that you can do at home. And we're hosting that with the South Central Pennsylvania Genealogy Society. And then finally, on March 27th, our All Vets oral history speaker is Alexander Young, who is an Army veteran who served in Iraq. And I think you just heard the doorbell, so I don't know if somebody wouldn't mind checking that out. That would be great. Oh, thank you. And that's all I have. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Nicole. So tonight we're going to be talking about camp security. It is the only POW camp from the Revolutionary War to survive modern development. Hidden beneath a farm field, its exact location has been a mystery until archaeologists discovered the camp stockade in 2022. In this presentation, we'll explore the significance of camp security in our nation's history, the methods that archaeologists use to find it, and plans for the site's future. Our presenter tonight is John Crawmer, and he's the lead archaeologist of Camp Security Archaeology Project in York, Pennsylvania. He's been working to find the camp security stockade since 2019, and he also has archaeological experience in Massachusetts, Maryland, and Israel. So, and no further ado.
Thank you very much. All right. So thank you for coming out and learning about our research at Camp Security and for tuning in for those online. My name is John Crawmer. I'm the lead archaeologist for the project. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about a lot of the sort of process that went into finding this site. The site was sort of missing for over a century, and it took many years, many attempts. So we're going to talk a little bit about that story, sort of the thought process and methodology behind that, and then we're going to look towards the future. So we're going to be able to answer, where is Camp Security? And to start off, we're going to need to know a little bit about what Camp Security was. So Camp Security was a prisoner of war camp that housed roughly 1,200, maybe more, British prisoners of war. The Camp Security refers to actually two camps, two residential areas. There's Security, which was guarded by a strictly guarded stockade, which is depicted in this probably early 19th century drawing. So this drawing was a drawing based off of a prisoner's account, his journal. So there was the strictly guarded stockade, and then there was the less guarded sort of area of huts. That was actually built by the prisoners themselves. The camp opened in July 1781 and was built in a single month. So it was ordered to be built and constructed in a single month, July 1781. There was been some debate as to like what type of prisoners were there. For in a lot of local legend, it's Hessians traditionally that were in camp security. That's not true. It's actually British regulars or NCOs that were held at camp security. This also included women and children. So about roughly a third of the population were women and children. So like I said, not everybody was in the stockade. So there was this strictly guarded area, camp security, and then roughly 200 yards outside of that, on a hill, was Camp Indulgence. Now Camp Indulgence was pretty aptly named because here prisoners were able to have a lot more freedom than their comrades in the stockade. They were able to make their own goods. They were able to travel around York, work on farms, build their own huts. It was actually a little village. And these prisoners were typically the ones who had families. They were usually the married. There were two sort of waves of prisoners at camp security. The first prisoners that came in there were the convention troops. These were the troops that were captured after the Battle of Saratoga. Later in the war, after the Battle of Yorktown prisoners were brought into camp security. And it's believed that the prisoners who were originally there in the stockade, the convention troops, were then moved out into the village on the hill outside the stockade, and the Yorktown troops were put in the stockade. So there were, when we're talking about camp security, we're talking about like a camp complex. There's a cemetery about a quarter mile away from the camps. Its survival is uncertain due to 20th century land modifications. We believe that it was most likely destroyed in the process of building a development. There was a flu that swept through the camp, and this was in 1781, so when the camp has relatively been recently built. A hospital was started construction, but it's not certain whether the hospital was actually finished. So just a general summary, we have 2 residential camps, we have guard huts, activity areas where people are producing their own goods. We have possible hospital, and the key thing to remember is that camp security equals the stockade. We have no maps from this time period. We only have historic descriptions that say that there were about 200 yards separating camp security, the stockade, and Camp Indulgence, the village of prisoners, and the village was on a rising ground, so on a hill. So with those sort of small descriptions, how do we know where this is at all? We know it was around near York, but where near York? There's a lot of area. So we start, our first little clue is historic deed records showing David Brubaker was the landowner. Now David, he wasn't too happy that his land got taken away and they tore up all the trees, ruined his fields and built these camps. So he sent this letter to the state of Pennsylvania government looking for money, some reparations. We have no evidence of whether that he got that money, but it does tell us that he was the landowner. And by looking at the deed records, we're able to figure out that it's roughly this area. So here we are in York. So it's out. This is the camp security preservation area in red. Now the camp security preservation area is called that because the land is currently owned by Springsbury Township and preserved by Springsbury Township. It's currently a farm, sort of, They don't really grow anything they want, they only really grow grasses. Cut that down, orchard grass that is. So here's a little zoomed up, camp security preservation area. In general, it's made up of 4 fields. We have these 2 lower fields divided by a spring and its runoff. And then we have 2 upper fields. Also note is the Schultz house. The Schultz house was built roughly 1750s. They would have been standing, it would have been contemporary when the camps were actually active. And it's still standing today, it's one of the oldest houses. Next. All right, so before I go showing you a bunch of maps and talking about the archaeology in detail, I want us to also get a little bit of understanding of how we dig holes archaeologically, easy for me to say. Through the process that we generally take and what digging looks like at this site. So, of course, we start with shoveling. Now, when we shovel, we always shovel sort of flat. We never dig just straight down. Reason being is because we're trying to hit a very particular level. You can generally see there's like this darker soil, and then there's this yellow soil. We're trying to hit the exact interface between these 2. We want to see just the face of that yellow soil. That's what's called the subsoil. Once we dig off a bit of the plow in this case, that darker soil, we then scrape it with a tool called a tiche. It's a French tool that sort of peels away the final little bits of this that darker plow zone soil, so we see all of that yellow. Then we move into troweling. And this is sort of the last step. This is where we get the fine little bits, these little crumbs out of the way. We take out all of the last little remnants of the darker plow zone. We see just the subsoil, that yellow dirt. Now you might be wondering, where are the brushes? I've seen archaeology shows or whatever, and they're always bringing out brushes. Generally in the Northeast, you won't see a lot of brushes. Brushes are typically used on stones, things like that. But not on the soil itself, because a brush will smear the soil, smear the coloration, and we don't actually see as much. What works a lot better is just giving that a trowel, and a fresh scrape will always be better than a brush in central Pennsylvania in general. So here's the whole process, start to finish in 30 seconds. It is this fast. So yeah, we just dig off that first layer, and at camp security, this is as deep as we'll dig. Generally, we'll just dig that first about foot of the plow zone off, and then all we're left with is the subsoil, and that's what we're really interested in seeing, is the subsoil. So we scrape it, and then I come by and take a photo on it. That's it. Why do we want to see just the subsoil? Well, because we're after these things called features. So features are incidents when, let's say you were to go out and dig a hole in your backyard or at this site today. You dig a hole, you dig into the subsoil, you actually pierce the subsoil. And then over time, that hole might get backfilled, either naturally or somebody might come along and throw dirt in it. What can happen then is 10 years later, 100 years later, 1,000 years later, doesn't really matter. Somebody can come along, carefully peel away that first layer of soil just to see this layer, and then what will be left is that scar that was left in the subsoil. In this case, this is a post hole right here. This is a pit, and then over here these are actually 2 pits. So it's contrasted by the yellow subsoil with this darker soil, it's darker stains. Now, I told you this is a post hole, this is a pit, this is a pit. Well, how do I know that? Well, the way I know that is because we dug them out. So a lot of times you'll think, oh, I've got this beautiful soil stain, this nice circular thing. But you don't know what it is until you actually remove the rest of that soil out of it, and see the shape of the hole that's left there. A lot of times we'll see a beautiful stain and it'll be a groundhog hole, right? We're not after groundhog holes, we're after post holes. So anyway. So now we have a general idea of what we're doing when we're talking about digging. Now, what are we after? What will the stockade look like when we find it? It'll look a lot like this. So this is a drawing from Fort Loudon, where they have a very beautiful stockade. And the stockade in the 18th century was built by digging a long continuous trench and then placing post holes into it. So every little dark circle here, that is a post hole. And then they just drew the outside of the trench itself. Now what that looks like on the surface is this. So this is a reconstruction. I think this is Fort Ligonier. So again, the way they set these big posts, they dig a trench and then set the posts into the trench. And that's what we're looking for archaeologically. So now we're ready to get into some map craziness. All right, so the first excavations at Camp Security happened in 1979. By the State Museum of Pennsylvania. Now they found 85 archaeological features, and that's this in this map. These are the red blobs you see in this map. The purple, those are their trenches. That's where they actually dug. Now they use some techniques that we don't use anymore, but this was done in the 70s. And they use the bulldozer just to push off all the dirt. Today we don't do that. It's a slower process, not using the bulldozer, but it's a lot more careful. We don't lose quite as much. So the key findings from 79 are, first of all, we have a ton of features, which is great, and they found a ton of artifacts. They found over 15,000 artifacts. A lot of button blanks and straight pins, but there's no actual structure. There's no stockade. There is this fence line right here. But that's pretty much it in terms of structure. So what that tells us is that this is most likely, based on the artifacts, is a work area related to Camp Indulgence. So we have Camp Indulgence most likely found, which is a great start. But where's the stockade? So first thing that happened in terms of finding the stockade, or trying to find the stockade, was a magnetometry survey. So if sure some people out there are familiar with GPR. This is a similar type of technique. It basically identifies changes in the magnetic field beneath the ground surface, and picks out anomalies. So if we look at this map over here, we've got a bunch of anomalies, right? And this one is the biggest anomaly, and what the people who did the magnetometry survey suggested be done. So that's what we did. In 2014, came out and we dug. Now we dug a series of shovel test pits. Those are these circles here. So each one of these is a pit, just like this. In that process, we found a bottle dump, early 20th century bottle dump with some bottles from the Emmings dairy. Now, we did not find any evidence of a stockade or camp security. I don't even think there were any 18th century artifacts found in this. So this was a bust. Now that kind of makes sense. If you look at this map, Camp Indulgence right here is up on a hill. So this is a hill here. Camp Indulgence is here. So it's up on a hill. This area isn't on a hill relative to this. It's on the same plane. So it makes a lot more sense to do work down. So that's what we did in 2016, or 2015, sorry. We came downhill and started digging long trenches, changed our excavation strategy up, because the idea is we're looking for a stockade trench. And so in order to intercept a trench, it's most effective to dig your own trench, trying to intersect it. So that's what we did. Now, we didn't find a stockade here. We did find a nice big hand dug pit, but did not have any 18th century artifacts in it. So we couldn't say this is camp security feature. We did find a fair amount of Native American artifacts, the oldest dating to about 7,000 years ago. Actually, numbers wise, the number of Native artifacts really is close to the number of 18th century artifacts at this site. And that's not totally surprising because Native peoples have been using the land a lot longer than the, over 20 months that camp security had been used. So 2015, no go. So we tried again in 2016. Found a few more 18th century artifacts, but no pipe trench. Now we found a pipe trench. We didn't find the stockade trench. And you can see the pipe in there. This pipe runs from the spring down to the Schultz house, probably 19th century pipe. But it does tell us that our strategy of digging trenches is effective in finding archaeological trenches. So following that, Shippensburg University came out and did a GPR survey. So this is similar to the magnetometry in that there's no digging, but it uses ground penetrating radar. So it sends radar signal down into the ground and measures the signal bouncing back and looks for anomalies that way. And they found a few anomalies. So in 2019, this is what we did. We dug just where they told us to dig for the anomalies. We dug the trenches, test units, every single one of the anomalies turned out to be geologic. So remote sensing is not working. And we have yet to find our stockade. Again, found some more 18th century artifacts. We did find a nice historic post bowl, but not what we're after. So what's going on here? Why can't we find the stockade? There's a couple reasons. One is this is a really big area. Preservation area itself is 160 acres in size. Now, if we just limit ourselves to these lower fields, that's closer to maybe 30 or 40 acres. But still a really big area. It's basically needle in a haystack kind of problem. So what do we need to do? Oops, I pressed the wrong button. All right, we need to get more data over the broad area. So what we did was we plowed up big areas. So this is 25 acres. And we surface collected, which means we just walked across systematically across the field, looking down, and we found artifacts. When we find an artifact, we put a flag down. Someone comes along with a GPS and maps that location. And that leaves us with this map. Every little red dot that you see here is an artifact. We found over 1,000 in this survey. What we're looking for are clusters. So sort of groupings, tighter groupings of artifacts relative to the sort of randomness that you see like out here. So we've got 3 of them. One is right by Locust Grove Road, and believe it or not, that's just trash off of Locust Grove Road. Back here behind the Schultz house, we found a lot of redware pottery fragments. We also found clay pigeon and shotgun shells. So somebody was shooting some plates and some clay pigeon. What's really got us excited is this area here. Now this is not as tight as our clay pigeon, close to our road stuff. But this over here is a nice cluster that has a fair amount of 18th century artifacts in it. So that told us that this field is looking like a good candidate. We also, so speaking of the 18th century artifacts, we found a number of King George coins. We found a nice cowbell. Now this actually dates until a little bit after the camp period, but it's still really neat because this bell still rang. And then we found this button here. Now this is a button foil, so a thin piece of metal that would have been wrapped around a wooden button, most likely. And it's stamped with the number 33. Now 33 is significant because we think it could be an allusion to the British 33rd Regiment, who were captured at Yorktown and are mentioned in Washington's orders of prisoners to be sent to Camp Security. So we know that we're getting close to Camp Security, at least field-wise. Now, what about the area directly between the Camp Indulgence site and this, field of interest? Well, previous researchers in '79 they noticed that there were terraces in this hillside. So cut terracing that they believe might be related to the camps. Now, there is an example in New York of British encampments doing this, actually cutting terrace into the hillside. So it was always sort of believed that maybe this could be related to camp security. So we decided to test that. We dug a series of test pits. Here we are. And what we found was that we found a few 18th century artifacts, but they were mixed with like modern stuff. Which told us that this was a lot of more recent fill that had built these terraces. And looking at old aerial photography, 1938, we don't have the trees anymore, and we can see that there are no terraces. But in 1948, suddenly now we have some terraces. So sometime between 1938 and 1948, somebody came out and put terraces in the hillside. So it's not related to camp security. I promise eventually we're going to find camp security. All right, so 2021. We came back out, we decided that this field is a good field based on the surface collection. So we set in some trenches. So we put in some new trenches. And we found ourselves, let me zoom in a lot. We found ourselves some pits. So one of these is actually the pit that I mentioned in 2015. We came back and we dug that all out, still didn't find any artifacts in it, and we found a partner pit beside it, I think this one. Now these pits are really, really deep. The deepest one goes about 7 feet deep. It gets close to the water table in this area. It possibly could have been a well or attempt at a well. I tend to think probably an attempt at a well. Both of these probably are attempts. But the downside of these, they're cool, but the downside is that we didn't find any artifacts to confirm whether these are related to the camp. Now, if we go to the other side of the field, we now have a series of historic post holes. Now this is a particularly good one. This one's about a foot in diameter. But we have a smattering of them. They're sort of randomly set across this field. And the randomness is really due to our sampling strategy. It's just a reflection of us randomly setting in trenches. And that's what our results look like. So in order to figure out what these posts are, we have to be a lot more systematic about things. So this was where we left off in 2021. And here we are, 2022. So what we did was we dug a series of larger test units around the post holes we're interested in, just to see if there's a pattern. And there was a pattern. Zoom in here. So first thing is a lot of these posts are really, really big. The biggest is about 1.5 feet and 3 feet deep. So these are pretty structural things. Also, they have these smaller posts set on the outside of them, set in at an angle. So they have supports related to them. So this is a pretty beefy structure. We generally have a central wall, sort of a western wall, and then we have this eastern wall with a second structure sharing this eastern wall. That's why I call it the interior structure, because it sort of have this exterior wall structures, and then you have this interior structure. And with that interior structure, we have these shallow pits that, again, no artifacts in them, but interesting elements. We also have a possible fence line. We don't know too much about it because we didn't dig as much over here. The reason I say fence line is because the posts are a lot smaller. Go over here, and here we are, finally. Camp Stockade. So, Camp Stockade, if you remember back to the map from Fort Loudon, pretty similar to that, right? So we've got this trench coming along, and we've got these post holes all through them. We also have a possible fire pit here, with another pit. Now this pit, we later found out, is actually later than the stockade feature. The reason we know that is because we done this last year. And we elaborated on this mess a little bit, on the mess and made it even more of a mess. So we've got post holes all over the place. Interestingly, we have another structure. I call this structure B. This one I renamed structure A, but for this presentation, it's turned out. Now, structure B is very similar to this, pretty similar in size. It's got a shallow pit at its southern wall, similar to the internal structure. The difference is that it's got fire pits on its northern edge, which is really interesting because British military regulations at the time sort of forbade this type of stuff. They forbade having fire pits right in where you're living or around structures like this. For obvious reasons, catch fire, it would be not great. But that doesn't seem to be the rule here. It also tells us another important thing is that these structures are probably related to people in some way, meaning that people either resided in them or worked in them. They weren't built for the purpose of housing animals. So yeah, they're related to human activity. Whether people were living in these structures, we don't know, or just working in them. We also don't know whether they're related to camp guards or prisoners. There's a lot we don't know about them. Now, our camp stockade grew quite a bit, so we uncovered an additional 40 feet of the stockade. So what we can see now is 60 feet of the stockade. You also see it's taking some crazy turns going on here. It's like, you imagine stockade just be like this straight line going. That's not what we have here at all. So the reason that we have these strange turns and stuff is because this is likely a bastion. So if we look at other forts, this is, I believe, model of Fort Bedford. You can see if you follow the stockade along, then we start getting some crazy turns. And these sort of jutting out points in a stockade are bastions. And they're very common. So at Camp Security, that's what we think we probably have happening here, but we don't know 100%. Just have to dig one. This is an aerial photograph of it. It's not the most beautiful. It's not as nice as I would like it to be because the site got a little bit of rain on it. Kind of marred things a little bit, but that's the stockade. So we finally found the stockade. Hooray us, we did it. But now what, right? And this is a question I get a lot. All right, so you did this, now what? Now what? So thinking about Camp Security's future, now this is just me talking, this isn't representative of the Friends of Camp Security or Spring Township, this is just my opinion. I think the number one thing that we need to do is uncover the rest of the stockade, try to survey the rest of it. Reason being is we have a lot of questions left. We don't know what's inside or outside here yet. We don't know what those ancillary structures are, if they're related to guards and prisoners. We don't know how big the stockade is. We don't know its shape. The next piece is Spring Township's planning. So the township would like to do something with Camp Security. Right now, like I said, it's used as a farm field, so a tenant farmer grows orchard grass on the property, it gets cut, and that's sort of how it's maintained. But this is an important enough site, being that it's the last surviving site of its kind. It's a physical example of our nation's earliest prison camps. And there's a lot that we just don't know about that subject specifically and this site. So Spring Township obviously wants to do something with this property. And I think key to that planning process is going to be understanding the stockade and understanding the footprint. We already have an idea of where Camp Indulgence is. We have just a little bit of slice of information of where stockade is. Once we elaborate on that, then we can move on into public interpretation and public access. So it's really, you can go to the site, obviously we go there to dig, but if there are no roads or anything like that. It gets stuck in the mud all the time out there. So there are no walking paths or anything like that, and no signage saying that, hey, this is camp security. So a step, hopefully after the Spring Township planning would be taking steps towards public interpretation and public access, walking paths, signage, that kind of thing. But we can't get there until we understand the footprint. We could stick a sign in the middle of the field and just call it a day, I guess, but that sign wouldn't really mean anything. So on that note, we do have possibly an upcoming date. It's not official yet. Tentatively, it's planned for May and June. Our excavations are typically 6 to 8 weeks long. Now, each excavation season is a little bit different. This season, we're going to do some more GPR. We have a graduate student from IUP who's going to do survey as part of his master's thesis. So we're going to be doing that, of course, excavation and then lab work, which will involve watching artifacts, labeling artifacts, that kind of thing. Now, all of the Friends of Camp Security digs are volunteer, so volunteers can register to come and participate and actually dig and take part in the archaeological process. Find features, dig those features, all that fun stuff I showed you at the sort of at the beginning of the presentation. We'll also have a public site tour, most likely in June. Again, these dates aren't official yet, but most likely in June. We're going to have a public site tour. The reason June is because later in the season, we'll have more holes open, more things to show. And then volunteer registration would most likely be announced March 22nd. I keep prefacing that because things aren't quite official yet. We have to have Friends of Camp Security have to have a meeting to officially make it official that we're doing. So the volunteer registration will most likely be open in March 22nd. Regardless, if you are interested in volunteering or getting a friend to volunteer or whatever, they can just simply email campsecurity@campsecurity.org. Say that you're interested in registering. What we'll do is we'll put you on a list and you'll be the first to receive an email with the registration paperwork. And we can get you out. Also, if you're interested, here are our social handles and the website campsecurity.org. If you want to read any of my reports, if you want to learn a little bit more about the history. I'm not a historian, I'm the archaeologist, so but we do have several great historians who have done a lot of work that have some things on the website. And again, I'd be remiss to say none of this work would have been possible without the over 200 volunteers who have participated since 2014. And we've also received funding from the National Trust for Historic Preservation and Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission. So I'd like to thank them for making this all possible. That's all I got.
We're gonna do questions if you.
Yes, I'm sure I missed a bunch of stuff.
Does anyone have any questions, comments?
Is there any explanation for why out of all the lands in York County and the surrounding area, why this would have been chosen for a camp?
So,
Can you please repeat the question for the one line?
yeah, so basically, why this area, why York County, why this particular place for building the camp, could have built it anywhere, why here? So basically, York was chosen, and this area was chosen mostly because of its proximity to the Susquehanna River. If, you know, if there was movements on the war front, to where the prisoners could be at risk of being referred back into the main army, they could be sent across the river. It was also at the time, well wooded, so a lot of materials there to build the camp. So yeah, just a general reason. I'm sure Jonathan probably could give a better description. He's our historian, or one of our historians. Did I get it right, Jonathan?
Pretty close.
Pretty close, all right.
So we have some kids in the audience tonight, which usually never happens at Writers Roundtable. If young people want to have a career like yours, what kind of path would they follow?
Well, you start, by going into your mom's yard and just digging a lot. That's actually what I did as a kid. I did a lot of that. And then, you know, as you get older, look into participate, doing like volunteer opportunities as you get older. And then if you find that you like it, you like the work, getting your hands dirty, you like the process, then you can look into going to college for that. And then eventually, if you really like it at that point, then you're committed, then you go to grad school. Then things get worse, but yeah, that's just the general path. Dig a lot of holes. You'll find out if you like it.
Is there any camps in the French and Indian War?
Were there any
POW camps?
POW camps? I'm not, I'm sure there were, but I can't think of any off the top of my head, like archaeologically. Most of the archaeology related to the French Indian War in Pennsylvania is like fort related. Yeah, that's a good question.
The status of the fields in the off season, I mean, when you drive down Logan'sboro Road, all you see is grass.
Yeah.
So sites that you have found and that you have now identified as camp security, and then you have the dry holes where there's nothing there. What do you do with them?
We backfill them. We backfill everything at the end of every season. So if you were to go out there today, even though we found the stockade and all that, you'll just see fields because we backfill everything. At the end of every season, everything gets backfilled. Now, we don't backfill it by hand ourselves. Luckily, Spring Township is nice enough to get a skid loader out and push it for us, which is great. It saves us like 2 weeks of work. But we do that mostly because it's a safety issue. We're sharing the property with tenant farmer, and it's also better for the archaeology. You can kind of see, I mentioned it a little bit, this photo, if you look real close, you can see that there's some like scarring here. This is from water because this got rained on. And that just does damage to things. If we left this open, even if we covered it with some plastic or something, it would still damage the site. It's always better to, in terms of preservation, the backfill, and leave it as such.
So in the season again, you want to cover it again?
No, so what we do is we map everything really, really tightly. So this photo, this is a good example. This photo, so we do this thing called photogrammetry. We use a drone, fly it up in the air, and the drone takes photographs of the ground in spaced intervals in like a grid pattern. Then we take the photograph from that, put it into some software, and that stitches the photos together. We have what we call ground control points. So those are points on the ground that are known. We know the X, Y, and Z of those particular points. We only need about 3 or 4. We then identify in the photographs where those points are. We tell the program, hey, that point is X, Y, Z. And then when it stitches everything together, it creates a 3D model that's accurate to within about 1 centimeter. Now, what we do with that is we then are able to say, all right, we know the X, Y, and Z of every single post hole here now. We know the X, Y, Z of everything. Then I'm able to come out the next season. And let's say I wanted to start digging like down here. Or here, whatever, I wanna dig out this test unit. I can come back in and I can put the nails right back in, right where the old nails were. And just dig right, just start off right where we left off. I don't never have to dig new ground. Now, sometimes that's a perfect one. Sometimes you do dig new grounds. But you wanna avoid that at all costs, particularly at this site. So yeah, that's generally how we get around that issue. We just map everything really, really well.
What if someone wanted to take their metal detector and just start walking around? How organized is this effort? Would you guys call in the cavalry and hunt them down?
Yeah.
I'm seeing some head nods.
Yeah, well, so, now we do work with metal detectors, like metal detectors clubs. When I showed you that map of all the surface collection points and all that, part of that was a metal detection survey. So we do invite volunteer metal detectors to come out and help us find artifacts. Now, they don't get to keep the artifacts afterwards, but it helps with our research in mapping where things are. And we worked with several metal detectors clubs who are all great. But you do have people who want to go out and just find stuff. Now, there is a township ordinance on this property. You're not supposed to do that. It's against township ordinance. However, if you did live and let live. Just don't do it here. Don't let us catch you doing it. But you want to do it somewhere else, that's fine to me. Anyway. Yeah.
There were a couple questions online. One, I think you already answered about why did they pick York, was to keep the British troops from going back to the army.
It was,
Escaping.
now, one thing to add to that, so the guy, if you remember the drawing, very early in my talk, that was based off of Roger Lamb's journal. And Roger Lamb escaped camp security. There was a fair number of him and seven other guys escaped camp security. In general, the security at camp security wasn't super tight. So prisoners were leaving and rejoining with the army here and there anyway.
The other question was about the prisoners, what battles they came from. There's something about the Battle of Cowpens in the South, I guess in Virginia.
No, so it was Saratoga
Yeah.
and Yorktown.
Exclusively?
Yes,
Yes.
pretty
Okay.
much so, yes.
All right, great. Thank you.
Anything else?
Talk to us about the moment of discovery. If there was,
Sure.
if there was a moment or was a moments, and then how you then conveyed that to Carol and others.
Sure. So this would have been back in 2022, the fall of. Now, we were digging our test units following post holes. And we ran into this feature. Now, the features at camp security, this gets a little technical. The features at camp security don't always tend to be very evident in color wise. So I showed you those dark stains. Sometimes the stains aren't quite as dark, but the soil is still very soft. That still is conducive of a feature. The reason being, we think, is because the plow zone, or the A horizon, you call it, that upper layer, was a lot thinner back hundreds of years ago than it is today, due to erosion and stuff. But long story short, we found this little bit of a streak, started digging it. Now, a friend of mine, who I've dug with for many years, I had her dig it, and I had her dig it for an entire week by herself. I didn't want anybody else touching it. Now, I love all my volunteers, but I needed somebody who I really, really trusted to dig it. So I had her dig it for a week. And she dug out this start of a trench, and then she found a post hole. Then she found another post hole, and eventually it built up to the point where all right, now I have to say whether or not this is what I think it is. Because I was mulling it over about a week as to whether or not I have enough, because really it's never enough, you want to be super certain. I think it was a Friday or whatever, I went out and I decided, all right, well, today's the day. I've seen enough, today's the day, so I called Carol Tanzula, the president of Friends of Camp Security. And told her, Carol, you should come out to the site. Now, every single season, she tells me, you find anything, let me know, give me a call, give me a call. And I don't know, in 3 or 4 years of working with Carol, or more than that now, I've never called her once, except to tell her I found the stockade. So called Carol, she knew, I told her just come on out, so she knew that she had to come out, because I'd never do that. Then showed Carol, and then I think that day we showed Mark Hodgkinson, who's the township supervisor, and then the Friends of Camp Security got in contact with the AP, and then everything blew up, because then people were contacting me. I'm still working, so people are contacting me. Can you send me this photo? Can you give me a soundbite on this, whatever. That was fun. I don't usually deal with media stuff very often.
I will say there were tears when John called me. There were tears.
Yeah. So, yeah.
That is the original post holes, are they visible here? Where's ground zero?
So the original post holes, are you
I
talking?
mean, those that were discovered, and the original trends that you're associated.
Yes, okay, so it'd be right here. That would be the first spot that we found. Because we were working further to the north, we were working our way south, and we just randomly hit it. So that's why it's always, better to be lucky than good. And we got lucky and hit it. That's just how it went, so.
What was it about that maybe you said this, but what was it about that trench that seemed promising to you?
So it's the post holes in the trench. Now, just a trench is great, but the real defining feature of a stockade is trench with posts in it. So seeing the posts start coming out from the stockade, that was the real giveaway. That's when I said, okay, that's what we have, so. And now we're trying to figure out more about it.
The subsoil there, the trench was then so many inches below the subsoil, and the post holes more below the subsoil. So you're looking at 2 different layers there, is that correct?
Yeah, so most likely, we probably didn't dig all the way to the bottom of it. We just dug down to the point where we could recognize this post hole. Now, we don't really know the exact bottom, and the exact bottom will be different depending on where you dig. So most likely, yes, the posts would have been set down into the trench, but they were sharpened on both ends. So the post would have gone down further into the earth below the bottom of the trench. But I'm not sure, I don't think that we've actually hit the very bottom of the stockade. We will, in the upcoming dig, we will do that, but right now, it's more about figuring out the area, figuring out the footprint rather than digging it all 100% out.
I'm sorry if you already mentioned this, but what's your strategy this summer in terms of where you might be working and what we're seeing?
So we're gonna start in this southern area here. Now, last season, we went both directions, so we started off with like this piece here, and then we followed it on both sides. That turned out to be a little bit too chaotic, so we're just gonna stick to one side. And it's gonna be this side, because this side is a little bit better defined. The soils play a little nicer down here. So we're gonna start there, and then in the week prior to when we start digging, we're going to have a GPR survey in the area that we're looking at digging. Reason being is for this master's thesis, He wants to do the survey, and then we're going to be able to ground truth it for him immediately after he does the survey. So 2 birds, 1 stone. For him. Yeah,
What was the purpose of the trench instead of just putting the holes right into the ground?
it's just a little faster. A little faster, a little easier. You can get the post seated into the ground a little bit better.
It's a history question, but do you know what the census was? And
At this time, or
when census of the prisoners?
that's a Jonathan question, for sure.
We have a return from April of 1782, which accredits 1,588 men, women, and children to the site to camp security. However, in fact, I might have a copy of it back here on the table. No, I don't. That's something. But there's a column that says on bail, and as John mentioned, a lot of those prisoners who were in the village outside of the stockade were not always living on the site. And so if we look at those who were on bail, they could have been anywhere in York County, basically. In fact, we have an account of a prisoner who was working as far away as what's now Adams County during this time period. If we subtract those, as John said, John's been using the figure about 1,200. So it's probably, that's probably close to the total number of residents at any one time. But it's very difficult to determine because the numbers change all the time. The returns we have are not consistent. And like I said, there's always these prisoners who are on bail and on pass, and we don't know whether they were there just traveling the community, whether they were living off site. We do know that some of them were living off site, but we don't know how many. But I would say probably your maximum is going to be 1,500 to 1,600 people, but it might be actually closer to the figure of 1,200 that John used. We've been arguing this back and forth for a couple days.
It's messy,
Yeah.
so.
In follow-up to that, during the period, is it common for British soldiers to fight a war with their families in tow?
Yes. Yes. British regulations allowed up to 30% of a regiment to have their wives and children with them. And my research also indicates that probably some of these men picked up wives here in the colonies while they were in prison. Because the prisoners from Saratoga, the convention prisoners, had been taken captive in 1777. So by the time they get to camp security, they're ready. It's almost 4 years that they've been in captivity.
Yeah.
So they've gone through a lot. But there's a very prominent historian by the name of Don Haggis who's done a lot of work on women in the American Revolution, particularly women in the British Army. And he wrote an excellent article about this and how who was allowed to have their families with them and how they transported them and so forth.
How many guards were there?
How many guards were there? This is a Jonathan question again.
We don't know exactly. Initially, if you count up all the militiamen who were there in July and August of 1781, there may have been as many as 200 to 300. But that probably wouldn't include the men who are helping to build the stockade and the huts. Colonel Moses Hayes and Continental Line Regiment took over in January of 1782. And one return, I think you have a copy of that back there. One return only lists about 70 men who were stationed at camp security. So we don't know, again, we don't know exactly how many. One of the things that I'm hoping to do this year is to develop a database of guards and prisoners. And so we can start to try to get a handle on numbers, names, at least of the knowns of things, the things that we have documents of so far. But there are a lot of gaps in the records. And even the British, for the British, the American Revolution was like the Vietnam War was for us. They kind of wanted to put it, forget about it. And when you read a lot of these British regimental histories, there's a big gap between what they did before the Revolutionary War, and then they love to play the Napoleonic Wars because they won, right? They won during the Napoleonic Wars. But here's the American Revolution, and there's very little information in British records about the prisoners themselves. And we just have a couple documents to tell us who these prisoners were, how many.
Other renditions of what the court looked like besides what's here from Lamb, Dr. Lamb?
Other drawings and stuff.
That you have an idea.
The Lamb is probably the oldest. There have been more recent drawings or attempts to figure, hypothesis. But that one would be the oldest. All right.
Can we give John another round of applause?
Well, you could tell that was an interesting presentation based off all the questions, so thank you for engaging, John. I still have tons of questions, but we're going to transition now to our Writers Roundtable segment of the evening. So what this means is we are going to turn off the camera and we're going to ask that us as a group situate our chairs in a way where we can talk and listen to one another. And what we'll do is we'll go around in a circle and you will have 2 to 3 minutes to share something that you're working on or a project in particularly that sparked your attention, or ask questions of each other, because this is a chance for us to network and learn from one another and share resources that we're finding it. And for me, just to, I don't know, talk about something I'm researching, just to have someone that's also interested in history. So everyone that has watched us online, thank you for joining, but poo-poo, you stink, you miss out on this, sorry. Next time, show up in person so that you can be a part of the Writers Roundtable. So the next one will be in June. We will have Jim McClure and Scott Mingus go over their most recent book, which is the 25th anniversary of Never to Be Forgotten. That will also be more of a workshop, so we will have a lot of instructions on editing and the power of a good title and SEO and the books and how to just get people to read your materials. So anything else I missed?
1 to 2 minutes instead of 2 to 3.
Okay, so because there's so many people here, we're gonna have 1 to 2 minutes for you to share your research. So thank you everyone online. And now we'll transition.
So if you wouldn't mind, just our chairs kind of situating in a way where we